Dear participants, welcome today to the second seminar provided inside of the research platform Disability Studies in Eastern Europe Reconfigurations. I'm one of the members of organizing team. My name is Alicja Fidowicz. I'm PhD. I'm teaching assistant at Jagiellonian University in the Faculty of Polish Studies. I would like to introduce you the other people who are the part of organizing team. It's Magdalena Zdrodowska, PhD, who is also the member of our organizing team. I would like to introduce you Monika Kwaśniewska, who is also the part of our organizing team, and Monika Świerkosz, PhD from Jagiellonian University, who is also the part of our organizing team. And today we have this pleasure to meet with Dubravka Zima, who is Croatian professor of children's literature and Croatian literature. She works as an associate professor at the Faculty of Croatian Studies at the University of Zagreb, Croatia. She teaches courses on children's literature, Croatian literature, and popular culture. In her scientific work, she explores cultural and historical frameworks of childhood, girlhood, and adolescence in Southeastern Europe in the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. She is the author of four books on Croatian children's literature, including Introduction to Children's Literature, which she co-authored with Mariana Hamerszak, Zagreb, Rejkam International, 2015. She is currently working on the book on the cultural history of girlhood in the 19th century Croatia. And today, she made us such a pleasure to present her seminar entitled Imagology of Disability in Children's Literature. Mrs. Dubravka Zima, we are glad to see you today. And I think that it's the best moment to give the voice to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and to the opportunity to be the part of the project and for your nice introduction. I am glad to be here with you today, and also I send my greetings to all of you, including members of the committee organization committee, and also to all the participants. So, as Alicia also already introduced, my today's topic will be imagology on disability in children's literature, and I must apologize in advance. When I am slightly nervous, I tend to speak very fast. I am notorious between my students as a very fast speaker, so I am trying to speak as slowly as possible to make myself clear and to make myself understandable. So if I am going, if you notice that I am talking too fast, please make me tell me something. Is it possible to share screen? I hope it is. I will start to share screen with my presentations. My presentation, it is about children's literature, which with the examples that I have chosen from classical children's literature written in English or German, but everything is in English translation, and some examples from Croatian children's literature that I have also translated in English or that are already translated in English. So I hope it will be everything clear that I have chosen. So I am starting to share my screen now. I hope that I will know that. Disabled, okay, what does it mean?
Okay, advanced, okay, now it's changed.
Select that screen share. And now this. Do you see my presentation?
Yes, with me.
Okay, so I am starting, and I have prepared something. I think it will last about an hour and a few minutes over the hour, so that we have a little bit more time, possibly, to discuss it if it will be of interest to someone. So my today's topic is imagology of disability, with the first question, or the most important question, that I would like to interpret today with you: how children's literature and culture perceive disability, and what to do with it. And this other part of the question deals with the fact that I have chosen some very crucial classical texts of children's literature that were written in the end of 19th century, and I have tried to see how do these texts perceive disability. And I have noticed that when I choose the other examples from the end of 20th century, there is not much difference in the idea how disability is presented. But there is some hope, because my last example, it's from a few years ago, from 2009 year. It's written in Croatian, and it's for me one of the best examples how children's literature, contemporary children's literature, deals with disability, at least in Croatian context. But also I would discuss it further when I get to it. It's not only for relevant for Croatia. So my first topic is imagology, or my first concept I'm going to deplore today is imagology. Imagology is a traditionally discipline which was a part of comparative literature, but when it was developed, and it was around mid-20th century, between Netherlands and or Dutch and German scholars on comparative literature, first they saw imagology as a tool to research and interpret national images and stereotypes, meaning that it was the aim to answer the question, how do we see the other? And the other question that is developed from the first one, who are we and who is the other? And in traditional imagology, we were mostly part of some national community, and the other was outside the community. So it was mostly connected with how the nations see each other, and the field of research was literature. How does some national literature portray the others, the strangers, someone who is outside the community? But then, as the field was developing, and as also comparative literature was developing, and literature studies tend to had all of those turns that happened at the end of 20th century, like cultural term and space term, or time term and colonial turn, and so on. There was clear that the imagology also needs some new approaches. So those new approaches, they include efforts to put together some more complex terrain images, with images not presenting only images on national identities, but also some a little bit more complex concept that will deal with how some culture portrays or represents basic concepts that it is dealt with. And literature, and especially children's literature, is very appropriate for imagological research, because especially children's literature, it deals with images, and not only on the most basic meanings like in picture books, but also in the more advanced texts, also prose texts, novels, short stories, and even poems, children poems. The basic form, the core form, or core platform on which children's literature is developing, is the image. And also I see also imagology very presentable and very useful for children's literature, because cultural impact of children's literature still is very important. We can say that literature in a whole, like adult literature, not children's literature, have lost its fundamental cultural position in 20th century and 21st century, and it's not the most important cultural platform for some community. But I would say that children's literature did not lose it, that it's still very important presenting values and ideas to its readers. And when we say children's culture, we mostly think on children's literature. So I am now introducing this new approach to imagology, which I have developed based on Zrinka Blažević and some of my ideas. Zrinka Blažević is a Croatian historian who is very good scholar in imagology, and she presented those new theories in a paper in 2014. And she proposed a little bit broadened subject, which she called transcultural imagology, and which she developed on the two concepts, culture and image. And so culture, by definition of Zrinka Blažević, is a pedagogic ideal of cognitive, moral, and communicative perfection, which is necessary to create a virtuous community and provide it with an important political dimension. This definition I see as very useful and very practical because, and I see three very interesting terms, which I would say colloquial 3P terms, because they all of them begin with the letter P. It's pedagogy, it's perfection, and it's political. Those three terms define children's literature in general as a whole, and from the beginning of children's literature till today. Pedagogy is a field which was the birthplace of children's literature. Children's literature was developed from pedagogy. Also, perfection is something that children's literature aimed its readers or its public to achieve, and also without sometimes without even being aware of it. The whole children's literature is very, very much political. On the second part, or a little bit further definition, goes with my idea of traditional meanings of culture would be based upon the binary opposition between the cultivated and non-cultivated. And it's actually core definition of children's literature, which see itself as some kind of path or bridge between non-cultivated child and then cultivated in the end. Children's literature wants to have transfer some non-cultivated public into cultivated. And how does children's literature do it? Well, as I said, one of the most important concepts on imagology, but that imagology shares with children's literature, is the image. In my definition, image would be textual and non-textual representations and practice patterns that are developed within some particular socio-historical context, I mean within a particular community. Images are historically specific, which we will see when talking about images on disability, but also, which is very important, and it's my interpretation from now on, I see image as complex and ambivalent because they are both generated and generative phenomena in socially and culturally meanings. What does it mean? It means that images, when written or presented in literature or in any kind of discursive practices in some society, they have been developed and shaped by ideas that are important for some community, that are in some societies and culture very valuable. But then when they're written down, and especially when they're written down in children's literature, it itself generate another meanings and another stereotypes and images that are to be then also integrated in the social and cultural values. As some kind of example, I present image or images or sets of images on children that are from the theory of English sociologist Chris Jenks, who has a really very creative way of dealing with image studies under imagology. and who developed his theory or his structure on the some concept from Friedrich Nietzsche, as you will see. Jenks says that Western cultures and Western civilization, when thinking about child, always tends to see a child as either as Apollonian or Dionysian image. What does it mean? As I think that you are familiar with the concept of Apollonian and Dionysian, how those are presented in the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, and in Jenks' philosophy, or in Imagology on children, it is connected with two completely different sets of ideas and values, and ideologically completely opposite systems. Apollonian would be would have its roots in European Romanticism and mostly in the teachings of French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau and his very well-known treatise on education, which is called Emile or an Education, with its very, very notorious and, or not notorious, but very well-known opening sentence, which goes, everything is good as it leaves the hands of the author of all things, everything degenerates in the hands of man. And what leaves the hands of the author would be child. We are presented with a child from the God, and he comes, or he or she, when is born, it comes from the creator. And so it is beautiful, pure, innocent, completely good, and close to nature, archetypal of human existential, and so on. And that is a Apollonian image that Jenks elaborates, which was then very in the core of the completely social system when talking about, or when seeing child from 19th century onwards. And I would say that in today's civilizations and cultures, especially in Western Europe and in the Western culture and civilization as a whole, we tend to see child as Apollonian child, someone who is much better than we, who is better than adults, and who will inevitably go corrupt when growing up, let's say. On the other hand, there is this other concept, Dionysian, which is connected to one, which I would say is connected to one part of pedagogy from 19th century, and sometimes even developed a little bit before, at the beginning of 19th century and or an end of 18th century, which is called Black pedagogy. It's also colloquial term. It's not. It is, let's say, a term which is descriptive and not firm. And it describes method of child raising and educating, which we today see as very dangerous and very repressive. It's mostly seen throughout the whole 19th century in children's magazines, in children's stories, in intimidating stories, in stories that clearly point out what will happen to children if they don't obey. And Dionysian image on child then will see child as someone who is corrupt, who is untamed, who is not obeying, who is not disciplined, and who had to be disciplined by the hands or by the means of adults. So he or she, as a Dionysian child, will then grow up and be very good educated or very good bred, and then grow up to be a very respectful part of community. But as a child, or it's disobeying, it's let's say unstable and not better than adult. Let's see it as a binary opposition towards Apollonian. So that's the kind of images that I was looking for in children's literature when searching for images on disability. But before I got to disability, to classical children's literature, I will just mention something about stereotypes, which are concepts and structures that develop from the image. First of all, it is very necessary to point out that imagology deals with representations and not identities, that images are identities. And then those images tend to, especially in children's literature, to grow into stereotype. I think that you all know what stereotype is. It's most basic defined would be some mental image on certain phenomena. And it was the concept developed by American writer and journalist Walter Lippmann in early 1920s, when he saw stereotypes as some kind of mental maps to help us cope with complexity of any kind, and which were initially seen as a neutral system of classification, and as some kind of mental shortcuts to better understand problems that will be too complex to grasp simply. Then, through the course of time, we are now used to see stereotype of oversimplified opinion of something which is negative, mostly negative, and which is not neutral, but more aimed toward this idea of presenting some community as in relation to other community, and in that pointing out those stereotypes would mostly be not so neutral as Lippmann would consider it. Also, it has to be said that we can see stereotypes as auto stereotypes, which will be stereotypes on someone, on oneself, or hetero stereotypes, which are stereotypes on others. Now I'm coming to classical children's literature, and I'm going towards my examples. But first, when I say classical children's literature, I mean by that corpora of texts that were developed throughout the 19th century, because it was the period of really great momentum in children's literature, and with the abundance and of authors and interesting texts on children's literature that are today considered classic. It's not so strange that it happened in 19th century, because beginning of 19th century, most nations, as you probably all know, started to think about the modern school systems and started to more educate its population with the pretty much differences between different nations. For instance, in Croatia, we did not had compulsory primary education up until 1870s, but some countries were more developed and more modern and had its imposed even earlier. And to the end of 19th century, the number of people who were not literate anymore, who could now read and write, was very much higher at the beginning. And so throughout 19th century, this idea or this will to educate children was very well connected to with children's authors, who then wrote a lot of very interesting and today still considered classical. Like, for instance, we mention first classics of children's literature, Brothers Grimm from Germany, who at the beginning of 19th century published their first collection or first edition of their fairy tale collections. Also then Hans Christian Andersen, Danish author, also who wrote from the beginning through the middle of 19th century, and sometimes he will be called the father of children's literature or of modern children's literature. And then there are some authors whose main texts are still read throughout the world and still are considered classics, like, for instance, short novel Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, written by English author Charles Ludwig Dodgson with pseudonym Lewis Carroll in 1865. American author with his adventure novels, mostly on boys and boys' adventures. The best or very well-known adventures of Tom Sawyer were published in 1876. Then I have one example that I will be further interpret a little bit later. It's not English speaking, or it's not English written originally in English, but in German. It's a Swiss author, Johanna Spyri, and her very well and very loved novel on a little orphan girl, Heidi, was, or first book on Heidi was first published in 1808. There are also other authors, I think they're probably known to you by name, like Frances Hodgson Burnett, English classic, also Beatrix Potter, also English classic, Louisa May Alcott, American classic, Dickens, Oscar Wilde, Lucy Maud Montgomery, Canadian classic. All of them wrote their works in 19th century, and some of them lived to publish also in the 20th century. And so now I'm going to the second part of my lecture, which will be Imagology of Disability in Traditional Children's Literature, that I have somehow constructed based on all of my readings of 19th century's children's magazines, novels, smaller novels, but also novels and magazines from the 20th century. It's a proposition of how to see disability, or what are the images on disability in children's literature. Some of them are based also on the sources and bibliography that I have put at the end of my presentation. What is to be said on traditional children's literature? The first or the most important thing is that this ethical emphasis as a central tone. It is always be listened to or searching for moral of the stories, and those morals that are as some kind of idea that child is supposed to understand or to grasp from the story is clearly opposed into opposite good behavior versus bad behavior, and there is some values connected with good behavior, and first of all being obeying your parents, listening to them, being in a way classical good characteristics of good child, like being willing to learn, being willing to help parents, and most of all, the most important is being willing to obey. So I have put some images just as illustrations. And this is the central concepts that I've seen. But then later on, dealing that later with disability, we can say that when reading classical stories, even if they're not talking about people with disability or disability at all, when they're just mentioning some character with disability, or in a way just mentioning disability just only on the margins of the story, there are certain rules, or there are certain images that are repetitive. They're always there, and I have just put them in a list. First, it is interesting to see that people with disability are mostly portrayed as a group. And when you have some character with disability, he would be as a member of a certain group, although those groups could be only mental or only imaginary. Second, connected with this, that I said before, with the morals of the story, that's not rare that in the stories that there are short narratives on the causes of disability, and it could be connected with this idea of good behavior. For instance, I have read a lot of stories in which some child character would be left with disability when not listening, when they would not listen to their parents. when they were told not to do something and they did it, still did it, they sometimes would end as disabled for the life. Then, as a whole, there is no difference in the tone of presenting characters with disability, and they would be presented as unfortunate, or as Italian scholar on children's literature puts it, and I will mention them at the end of my story. It's Ayala, it's Camilo Ayala. He calls it poor little things or brave little souls. This little is very important, as it points out how a tone and narrative situation is presented as presenting this disabled character as other, as I have seen and as I have said before. Then the next level is all of them, mostly especially in 19th century, but also in the 20th century literature, they're accepting their condition, they're heroic, they're patient, and they're mostly portrayed as sweet and nice and to be, how to say, worthy of our empathy. Also, they be portrayed as underestimated when characters which are not disabled would underestimate their possibilities or their something that they skills or something like that, and then they will surprise everybody around them because they could manage something that were not expected of them. Also, sometimes they could be portrayed as wise or insightful, meaning that they have some other, let's say, other skills or other or something that's because of their patience, because of their endurance, they will have some other, let's say, powers that will also portray them as special. But also there not so rare also this image that disabled children are a trial to their parents, or their parents are not happy or are in some way, it's a tragic fate to have a disabled child or something like that. That's it's mostly what I have seen as when reading classical children's literature of the time. And now I have down some conclusion on that. When, for instance, I cite Davidson et al., which I also put at the end of the presentation, that see disability as fixed or unalterable state, and disability would be the main thing about the individual. It's defining the individual in dominating all other aspects of his or her place in society. I'm not so sure of that, and I can prove it, or I can then discuss a little bit later on that. It is the core assumption: disabled people are always presented as different or as the other, as we mentioned before. And disability, mostly in 19th century children's literature, cannot be understood in human terms. It's to be placed within God's mysterious scheme of things. And also, with what I present as my concept, disability can be cured with the help of God or nature, which is not so only in 19th century literature, which I will present now in my examples. The first example that I present here would be already mentioned relatively short novel Heidi, which was written in 1880 in German by Swiss author Johanna Spyri in two parts. First will be, but mostly those these novels would be then later published as with two books as one whole. So the first edition is the picture of a first edition, and what's important, or what makes Heidi so interesting example for disability, for the imagology of disability. I think that you're a little bit or even more familiar with the story. I will just put down the most important plot points. It's about orphan girl. She is not disabled. This Heidi, title character, and but she is presented with the friend who is in a wheelchair, who cannot walk and sits in a wheelchair, and it's Clara, a little bit older girl, whom she meets. Heidi comes from Swiss Alps. She comes to Frankfurt, and there she meets very rich and very sad and poor little girl Clara, which goes with these poor little souls and brave little things. She is only child. She is motherless. Her mother died, and her father wants to somehow forget his sorrows, and he travels a lot on business and leaves his daughter alone with the servants in their beautiful, rich and big house in Frankfurt. So she needs companion. Companion comes from Swiss Alps. It's small and much younger Heidi, which is presented as a wild child or nature child, which is completely outlined as a Pollyanna child, as I have mentioned before, and who is in strong opposition with her very healthy and very vivid nature towards towards soft and pale and Clara, who is presented as what's the name? Weak, let's say weak. So it's I have two parts from the novel in English translation and translated in English by Elizabeth Stork. First, it's the image on Clara. It is a very interesting short scene before Heidi comes to be introduced to Clara for the first time. So Clara is first time mentioned as a sick child. As when we read further novel, we don't see that she's sick, she's just disabled, but she is throughout the novel always presented as sick. And then she is presented as helpless. She had to be pushed around. It is pointed out in this small short part of scene. And also she is presented as a pale and thin and weak, and her eyes are sad, and she is always on the verge of this very pathetic, very unfortunate idea of being unfortunate, as we said, because of her disability. But then, as the story unfolds, Heidi will present this wild and untamed nature, and she will be the one, the tool or the media through which Clara will be cured, miraculously cured at the end of the novel. It is completely according to these images of disability that I mentioned before, that disability could be is to be understood as unfortunate, as a tragedy, or as something that causes sadness and misery in the whole family or the whole surroundings of this disabled child, and that curing out disabled girl will be happiness for everything. So here is this part or this scene when she is miraculously cured. She is cured, or she learns to walk, or she manages to walk after she visits Heidi in nature in Swiss Alps, and she's cured by power of nature, power of sun, power of fresh air, and all that is good and that is presented as divine in Swiss Alps. This scene, for me, it's very interesting. You can read it by yourself. I don't think I will have time to read all of my excerpts, but it's interesting to see how this cured or this miracle of walking is presented in this rhetorical means or stylistical level. as you can see, there are nouns as, no nouns, verbs as cried aloud, exclaimed, this is this emphatical, a lot of exclaims. Oh, Heidi, I can do it. Oh, can you really? Oh, I just can. And also, it's interesting that this happens after one of the character. This is Peter, which is mentioned in the first as the first word of my excerpt, was angry on Clara because when she is there on Swiss Alps, he cannot play with his friend Heidi, so she pushed her wheelchair, and they went down the mountain and they crashed. So she doesn't have her wheelchair anymore, and it means that she had to walk because of need. She doesn't have her help anymore, her wheelchair. So she is somehow pushed to walk, or she is, I don't know how to say it in English better. It's not expected of her, but it's a mean to overcome her now situation in which she does not have anything to walk around, to move around. She doesn't have wheelchair anymore. So this opposition, or this very interesting, stylistically, rhetorically presented opposition between being fixed or being completely immobile with completely I've lost the word, that she is entitled to have others' help. She cannot move without others' help. She's helpless completely without the others. And now she, with the help of sun and nature, and also a little bit help from God, because she's praying together with Heidi the whole time, she now can walk. This scene then is also first to present it in this rhetorical register, because it's towards the end of the novel, and there are some not much text left to the end of the novel. In those other parts till the end, there are also everybody who meet her, like her grandmother, Heidi's grandmother, her father, all around. They tend to see her miraculously cured as with the same exclamatory and the same register as is here presented, with a lot of oh yeah, oh, which puts this disability in perspective of being, something which is very unfortunate, but could be overcome with some kind of magical help. So my other example, it's also completely practically the same, also with the child character who cannot walk and then will be miraculously cured. As you can see, it's from the beginning of 20th century. And it's written by English classic author Frances Hodgson Burnett. She made her name, or she wrote the first classic or first successful novel before the beginning of 20th century. It was the novel Little Lord Fauntleroy from 1880s, also dealt with the imagological stereotypes, and in this sense of national stereotypes, because it dealt with one very stern and very, very cold English nobleman who had this unfortune, in his own terms, that his son married an American woman. So it's about a way that his American grandkid had to win very cold and very, very stern heart of his grandfather. And it's really a clash of national stereotypes in this novel. But then in her second successful classic, Secret Garden, Frances Hodgson Burnett had some other ideas, which also dealt with imagological stereotypes of stability. Tells the story of a girl who is presented on the novel first of the title, or the pictures of the picture of the book. Mary Lennox, who came from India as an orphan after her parents died. She comes to her uncle's house, where she is also met with the very cold atmosphere. Her uncle is also very cold man who has not interest in children and in any kind of human contact. He's struck with the tragedy of losing his young wife, and he's left with a son whom he does not want to see. This son is a master of the house, let's say, and he is portrayed as disabled, but he lies in his bed all days, and he became some kind of child monster in a way of treating servants and having tantrums and being mostly unbearable for his environment. But when this child, Mary Lennox, his cousin, comes to the house, she has to find her young cousin, because he's hidden, and not many servants had anything to do with him, had any touch with him. But she finds him, and she slowly presents him to the world. He was never out of this castle. He always lays in his bed and pities himself. So, first of all, when talking about imagology of disability, we have this one short part when he is portrayed as, where he is portrayed as invalid. As you can see, he's always referred to invalid. It's in his invalid's apartment, his helpless limbs. He is portrayed as someone who lacks something, who is not complete, let's say. You can read the part by yourself. It's just the introduction to the chapter where he will be miraculously cured. But unlike Heidi, when this miraculously cure is coming is approaching, he won't Colin, this young Colin, which is disabled or represented as disabled, he will not be cured by nature and sun and this nice touch of goodness around him, but with the rage. So you can see from this part presented here, children are in secret garden. They are surrounded by beautiful nature and they enjoy it. But Raja, which is some kind of nickname for Colin because of his idea of how he is a master of the whole universe and his house and servants, he does not want anyone to see them. So when a very old gardener comes and peeps over the fence, he is filled with rage because, and especially when after in their dialogue, Colin wanted to impose his power over old gardener, and so he asked, "Do you know who I am?" demanded Colin, still more imperiously, "Answer." And this old gardener, Van Wetterstaff, he says what servants knew about him, that he is, as I quote, poor cripple. He was presented as a poor cripple or invalid, and servants always rumored around them that there is a small crippled boy. And he says, but better the poor cripple. And Colin started to rage over this insult. He sees it as insult, and he started to cry, or in crying, in shout. It's shout and not cry. Colin forgot that he had ever had a back. His face flushed scarlet, and he said, I cannot see the whole text because of my window. I am not a cripple, he cried out furiously. I am not. He is not, cried Mary. Mary is his cousin. And so this is a rage which brings Colin to the strength to have, as it said, the strength which Colin usually threw into his tantrums, rushed through him now in a new way, and he goes up. He also uses his friend the deacon as a support, and he is standing on his legs, so he also is miraculously cured by the as a means of going towards happy end. It is not possible to have a happy end with a disabled child as a center of the story. I will let you read it for 2 minutes or a minute if you want. So when if you have read it, you can see that unlike Heidi, which presents its miraculously cure as a soft and very happy moment, here it is a moment of a strength which comes through rage, which is also, I think, imagologically interesting. The outcome is the same in both novels. And for me, it is also interesting to see that 2 classical children's books from the 19th and early 20th century has the plot around a disabled child and developed their plot around curing out a disabled child. The same goes for the third example. It's also a classical novel from American author Eleanor H. It's called Pollyanna. It was first published in 1913, and it is also about a child, which is very sweet, presented here in the title picture of the novel, although she is in novel much older than it's portrayed here. And I see this, but I have used this title picture because I see it as also as a part of this imagology of disability, to present the softness, weakness, and the vulnerability of a child by presenting her much younger than she actually is in the novel. Pollyanna is also orphan, as Heidi was, and she is very happy, very beautiful child that brings joy in whole of her surrounding, especially by the means of something which is called the glad game, which is a game that she was taught by her late parents, or especially late father, who taught her to try to see something good in every situation that comes around her. So she, whenever she is, wherever she goes, she tries to be glad, to find something to be glad about. And so when she is herself, unfortunately, had been in a very bad accident, which left her temporarily disabled, she had to find the courage inside herself to try to see something glad in this situation. But as you can see, when reading this excerpt, you could say that it is clearly, it is very like literature from 19th century, according to the style that is used to present child which is temporarily disabled. She is first unconscious. She's left unconscious for a few days, and then she had to be told that she's temporarily, or they don't know if it's temporarily or not, that she cannot walk. So everything around this scene builds up or represents disability as a tragedy, as you can see. Everything is told in soft voice. It's very tragic. It's very sad. No one, everybody around had to cry when they say that to a girl. And it is very hard for a nice and happy child, as Pollyanna was, to try to be glad when everything around her is so discouraging. For me, it is very nice to see how this rhetorics and how the stylistic of this part builds up this tragedy in presenting disability. I can let you a few seconds to read the whole chapter. And you see, there is this kind of, they don't want to tell her in this part what happened. They try to reassure you, just rest. It's just this, let's say, taboo about being hurt, and there is no way to express it. There is no word used about disability or not being able to walk or something like that. It's everything just around it. So just as the word itself is taboo. So now I am going towards more recent, towards 21st century, and I have two examples from Croatian children's literature. They are very strange and I'd say rather interesting, but they're also very close to the disability concepts or imagology of disability that I've presented from 19th century and beginning of 20th. First, it is a short children's novel, Tiki traži neznanca, which in translation means Tiki is looking for a stranger or unknown. Neznanac, which is in title of the novel, would be someone that you are not familiar with, or that's not necessarily only stranger, but something unknown. It's a very complex plot. It has a very complex plot. It deals with which is presented here in the middle of my slide, urban boy who is very much enjoying his urban environment, who enjoys his company, his ways through town that are when children are unattended by adults, where they can be free and on their own, but who is then to have this freedom, he had to be disobeying to his parents because they demand of him to stay home and watch his younger brother. And when Tiki does not want to stay at home, he is bored at home, so he is locking his brother at home and he is going outside. And the plot begins when some unknown person, some stranger, this neznanac from the title, starts to call on the phone Tiki's parents and to spy on Tiki, and who rat on Tiki, let's say, and telling his parents that he's wandering around and is not looking to his brother. And as the plot unfolds, it goes, it's very, very complicated. It's really overcomplicated for a children's novel, but what's the point of the whole situation? Younger brother comes into danger, in a very dangerous position because of the stranger's behavior. His behavior is, say, ambivalent. We are not sure, is he of good nature, does he have a good intent or bad? But we can see that Tiki is annoyed, and the brother is comes to great danger and so on. So we tend to understand stranger as a negative character. In the end, it is revealed that it's just a boy of their own age, it's a peer of them, who is disabled and who is in a wheelchair and cannot move around freely. So he wanted to have some friends, but did not know how to get friends. So he started to rat on Tiki. And in the end, when Tiki reveals, through the whole novel, he wants to know who is a stranger. He's very negative towards him and he wants to fight him because of all of stranger did. But when he learns that it's just the small disabled boy in a wheelchair, he changes his opinion and he says, I know who he is a good person, I love him. For me, it is rather clear that it's completely involved or employed in 19th century tradition of imagology of disability because of portraying a disabled child as a poor little thing and brave little soul who deserves our empathy, no matter what, and especially no matter that he did a lot of things that some child who is not disabled will be very strict punished for. But our neznanac is left unpunished. He is he did not understand that his behavior was bad, and the whole thing is left with this apology on our seeing the disabled boy as other and looking for some kind of understanding and presenting his fate as unfortunate. Then I have not so many examples anymore. One very, very interesting example from children's novel Eko Eko by Croatian author Hrvoje Hitrec from 1979. If you think that this title sounds a little bit environmental or ecological, you're right. It really is ecological book, and it deals about some kind of very interesting and rather modern ecological topics for the time. But what's interesting for me, it's not ecology, but the which is really marginal. The character does not have any kind of not very much role in the plot, but it's still there. It's a 17-year-old Krtsko, and now I have I have translated in English from Croatian. It's very interesting, so I'm going to read it the whole. 17-year-old Krtsko tried to step on his own shadow, but he did not succeed. He was huge, probably 2 meters high, as strong as a tram, but he was missing a few planks in his head. Vesna's mother said that Krtsko should be treated, but Aunt Mrga, Krtsko's mother, claimed that nothing could be done, that there was something wrong with his brain, and that it would remain so. He never went to school, he could barely say anything, and what he could say didn't make any sense. So you can see from 1979, a novel from 1979 did not have any problem with portraying disabled child as dumb, missing a few planks in his head, being something wrong with him. And as you can probably expect, till the end of the novel, Krtsko is miraculously cured by this some fantastic people who inhabit some planet in the universe, and they're presented here at the title picture with the three, as you can see, with 3 eyes and very very strange looking body. So those fantastic creatures have powers and the means to cure Krtsko, and so he is cured, and his parents are so shocked with his miraculously cure that they both, I think they also have some kind of stroke when they see him now as portrayed as normal, with as I quote. And I would say it's although it tries to employ some a little bit more humoristical discourse, it's still also right on core with 19th century imagology of disability. But then I have just short other examples with very interesting situations, both novels which are not connected to each other and probably were written without knowledge about each other. One is written in 1987 and the other in 1988, and they both have child character, girl, who is blind in the novel. One is written by the same person that wrote Eko Eko just a slide before, and the other is also from Croatian classical author Tito Bilopavlović. Both deal with urban kids in modern day Zagreb, and both present this blind character as poor little thing, as I have mentioned before. And in both novels, a blind character is miraculously cured out of its blindness, which is very, very interesting that in both novels, both characters will then, after they're cured, now when they can see, they are not blind anymore, they change their characters, they transform mentally, and their softness, vulnerability, and their specialty because of their blindness now become impudence and brashness. Sometimes and also it's interesting that in Filipini Zaugla novel, then Philip, the main boy protagonist, will then change his feelings towards this girl, and he will aim his love interest towards another more vulnerable and more soft girl after his love Ivanka is operated on eyes and now can see. It is also, I say, a rather interesting imagological concept about being blind, which is presented as also disability, but not just disability, also as lackness of something, of lacking something. And then that also it is, as it was pointed before, as in Davidson, it defines the whole character, the whole person. And it is clearly seen in this plot point when both girls are operated, and they are now completely different. They are not nice anymore, both of them. And so I will finish now with my last example, which I see as a very, very good example of completely new and very brave imagology on disability. It's a picture book which is called Hopscotch for Daisy, or in Croatian, Školice za Tratinčicu. It was written in 2009 by Ana Đokić as a writer and Tomislav Zlatić as an illustrator. I have presented here just images to see, but I would like you, if possible, to see or to read from with me the whole. It's very, very short, so I guess we could read it together, but I don't have it here, so I will try to now open it in here. Do you see now my screen? I hope so. Okay, so as you can see, it is, you don't see it?
I can see.
I see.
Okay. So as you can see, it is written in Croatian, but it's also translated in English. It is in two languages. It's called Školice za Tratinčicu, which means hopscotch for Daisy. I hope that you know what does hopscotch mean. It's a children's game in which they have to do some kind of ritual movements and advance through some fields and numbers and so on. So I am now going to read. I apologize for some pictures are not very well printed, but the others are good. We have the first picture without any kind of character. It's just blank, as you can see, but we are alert on a character, which is Daisy. It's not common children's name in Croatian. Not, I guess it is. It could be said it's a children's name or a human name in English, but in Croatian we don't have a name Tratinčica. So she is presented as someone from whose perspective we are now we see, because it says Daisy is lying on the grass, listening to the noise of the city and watching the clouds. And what we see on this first picture is exactly what Daisy sees at the moment. It's a very interesting tool to present the character. And now we also see someone who is obviously adult leaning over, and Daisy is presented with an adult face. Suddenly, one face hides the sky, and the noise of the city is silenced by the voice. Why are you all alone? And then we now have Daisy for the first time. I am not alone, says Daisy. I am here among the daisies. And we see Daisy for the first time. And now, you are our Daisy, says a kindergarten teacher, and she smiles. She picks Daisy up and takes her over to the other children. So now we are presented as that the child is probably kindergarten child, and it's a small one, and she loves to be alone, but she's also loved and cared for, because we see that this loving relationship between the adult and the child. And now she's put in a line. Play hopscotch with the other kids, says the kindergarten teacher, and leaves her to stand in line. As we can see her face, we see that she's not very happy about it, but she still patiently waits. And then finally, when it's her turn, Unfortunately, you don't see the English translation, but it says she hops away. As you can see, the hopscotch came here, and she hops and then she hops away. And now she hops through the town, and in her imagination, she flies over. While she's hopping on the pavement, Daisy can feel the wind hopping in her ears, and the street is hopping too. Hey, where are you going? Shouts Daisy from above, as if she is flying. Daisy is smiling. People suddenly seem so small. What are you doing here? She can hear the first question. What's your name? The second question quickly follows the first one. I'm Daisy, says Daisy, with her head among the clouds. Daisy, what kind of name is that? It's mine, says Daisy, loudly enough for the whole city to hear her. It can't be your name. Daisies are flowers. Daisy lifts her head and wonders, how can she not be what she is? Then she smiles and runs away. Daisy watches the clouds floating in the sky. She would like to travel too. Daisy, Daisy, she can hear someone calling her name. This is for me, it's the most beautiful part of the book, when we can see this situation and this relationship in the big head of an adult and the small and a rather vulnerable figure of a child, who is now obviously presented with some kind of stern voice and possibly a punishment or something. But kindergarten teacher is not stern, she's not punishing, but she just says, now you are going to be good and play with the other kids. You are not going anywhere. Okay, Daisy nods her head. Daisy waits patiently, again in her line, but finally, when it's her turn, what do you mean what she will do now? She will hops away again. So, how did you like this picture book? Is there anyone who can say something, or should I? Did you like it all? Well, what I would like to say is, what do you think, what is wrong with Daisy? Is it something wrong with Daisy? Why is she unable to follow orders? The fact is, now I am still, I will just show her once more. Well, the fact is, there is nothing in this text that indicates what is about Daisy, what's so special about Daisy, but we can see, based only on the illustrations, that Daisy is a small child with the Down syndrome, or with the condition that can cause some kind of disability. So text is completely silent about it, and the only thing that is that indicates her a little bit difference from the other kids is the pictures or the illustrations. And the whole picture and the whole experience of Daisy is not about her disability, it's about her adventure. She has adventure, and it's a beautiful adventure, and she enjoys herself very much. Sometimes we can see that she is also presented or approached as a little child from this changing of perspective, when we can see the grown-ups that are bigger than the kids, and they're a little bit, let's say, sterner, or they are presented as authorities. But she is still very happy kid. And it was the first ever example in children's literature in Croatia that I have seen that tries to impose completely other imagology, completely other ideas of disability when portraying a kid who is a little bit disabled, but still has its own story, its own narrative, which is not connected to disability, but to her happiness and being a very, very content little kid who can imagine that she flies over the city and that she enjoys herself very much, and also with her companions. And so, in conclusion, I have some final remarks to say about imagology of disability based on my examples. We can see that there are certain tools and certain means that were employed by classical children's literature authors that were let's say, that we're trying to be very sensitive about disability, and also that were completely integrated into society and could not make something new out of the usual stereotyping of disabled child as unfortunate, poor little thing, someone who deserves our empathy and who will be happy when miraculously cured. This idea that disability is to be cured and that's the only way of ending story happy is really powerful throughout the whole 19th and most of 20th century. So children's literature is a powerful tool, and as we can see from this example of picture book of our two authors, very interesting picture book, it's a powerful tool to implement new images and new values. And also when talking about disability topics and imagology of disability, someone who is dealing with children's classical children's literature has to be taken very carefully, has to take caution and be careful when discussing it and presenting it to the children, not to understand that there are those images of unfortunate tragedy, sadness, and idea of disabled people who are worthy only of our empathy is not so innocent and had to be taken carefully. Well, thank you very much. Here is my literature, which I also point out or send someone if they will be interested in it, and I am ready, or I am willing to discuss if you have some questions to ask.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Dubravka Zima, for this interesting presentation and also very interesting examples of children literature. Not only those well-known traditional classical, but also this, especially this, the last example is very inspiring for me. Mm-hmm. But before we will go to the short pause and the later workshop with Professor Davor Piskacz, I would like to give the voice to other participants. Mm-hmm. If you have any questions, they are also recorded because I think that sometimes they can be also inspirational and important. Mm-hmm. So let's go. And I see that Magdalena Strodowska is ready to discuss.
Hi, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for this wonderful presentation and great lecture. I really enjoyed, especially the last example. It is amazing. I have a question regarding the 19th century literature and the examples you have presented. And my question regards the issue of class. Because especially with Heidi and Secret Garden, the class is, I believe it is extremely important element of this representation. Can you comment on this?
Yes, well, I have not thought about it, but when you mentioned it, it's really interesting because both of those characters that are disabled are from higher classes, and I guess it is somehow in core with this idea that
I see that there is some technical problem. Dear Mrs. Professor, there is some problem with connection. We can't hear you. We apologize for technical problem. Yes, I see you again, but please turn on your microphone.
Well, I am really sorry. I don't know what happened. They just, I don't know. I thought something is with Zoom, or I'm sorry. Let's just finish the thought. Yes, I would say that the class is important issue, and also as a part of this idea that children's literature, especially classical children's literature in the 19th century, was very careful about not portraying higher classes as extremely happy and better. It is in core with the same value. The children's literature in 19th century put some emphasis on class, but not in a way of presenting someone. I would say also this ideology would be better understood as towards poor people being better than rich people, let's say. And then in this situation, you have two very rich but very unhappy children in this position.
Thank you for this comment.
Anyone else? Would you like to ask some question or notice something or comment? Yes, I see. Mrs. Katarzyna Ojrzyńska.
Thank you, Dubravka, for this lecture. I really enjoyed the last text and Daisy. Okay. Absolutely, brilliant character. Yeah, I had two questions, but one of which kind of overlaps with what Magda has just asked, and the other one actually at some point this is also connected to early children's literature. So at one point you stated that in these texts, people with disabilities are presented as a group, which I found quite perplexing, because it seemed to me that these characters are very much alienated, like very lonely characters who do not have any affiliation with other people like them. Especially when they're from
upper classes.
Upper classes, yes.
So I am sorry.
If you could elaborate on that, because
okay. Thank you very much for the question. I'm sorry. I'm aware that I wasn't very clear about it. Well, the first set of assumptions that I've listed before going to the examples were from the texts that are not so well known and not considered as a canonical text, mostly about the short stories or the stories for intimidation of kids or something in 19th century magazines or short story collections, and they tend to portray or to deal with imagology on more stereotypical level. And when in this situation, it will be more in core, not with these classics that tend to be different from those kind of texts, but with these texts that you can see in abundance throughout the children's magazines about kids who were not, who did not listen to their parents, so they had some kind of accidents or something like that, and then they will be not portrayed as a group in a story, but I am not sure if I can tell it in English as when talking about them, when presenting them, they would be presented as they, like they are. They're like
kind of a distinct category.
Yes. Okay. It would be one character, but it will be presented as someone who is in a group, like they usually have such and such reactions or something like that. And it's interesting that you pointed it out, because it's very clear that classical children's literature, or those writers who are considered classics, are much more careful when talking about disability and presenting their characters as unique. So that's why I've chosen those examples. So I was obviously I'm now aware that I was not clear enough that those assumptions come from the broader corpora, which is much not so good written as classics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there are only 2 minutes for the last comment and the last question. I can't see anybody who would like to ask questions. So I think that now we will going to the end of the first part of our meeting today with the seminar of Professor Dubravka Zima from the University of Zagreb. Thank you very much, Professor Dubravka Zima, for today's seminar, for your lecture, for interesting examples. And thank you very much for the last time.
Thank you.
And I would like to invite you to the workshop with Professor Davor Piskacz. Those of, I'm looking on the chat right now. Oh, okay. Thank you for a great lecture from Magdalena Zrodowska. I would like to invite those of you who are registered to the workshop with Professor Davor Piskacz in the next 15 minutes. And now I would like to announce 15 minutes of pause. So let's go to the break. Those of you who are registered for the workshop can meet in the same place. Okay.